Prithvi Shantirantariksagam Shantir Dyaus Shantir Dishashantiravantara Disha Shantiragnishantir Vayushantiraditya Shantish Chandrama Shantir Nakshatrani Shantirapashantiroshadaya Shantir Vanaspataya Shantir Gau Shantiraja Shantirashva Shantir Purusha Shantir Brahma Shantir Brahmana Shantir Shantireva Shanti Shantir me Astu Shantihi. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra sukhinas santu, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschit dukkha bhag bhavet, sarvastaratu durgani, sarvo bhadrani pashyatu, sarvas sadbuddhimapnotu, sarvas sarvatra nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the Divine Presence can be felt most clearly in our own hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Om Asato Ma Satkamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravir Mageti Rudrayatte Dakshinam Mukham Tena Mam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. We are studying the causal body, which in effect, as we saw, is really Maya, the veil of ignorance that covers our true nature. And last week we saw that this Maya has three attributes. They are called, in Sanskrit, they are called the three gunas. Many of you are already familiar with them. They are called Sattva, Rajas and Tamas. So the verses that we will see now today will describe each of these gunas, each of these attributes and what they do, what their function is. So let's begin with verse 111. Vikshepa Shakti Rajasaf Kriyatmika Yata Pravrittif Prasruta Purani Raga Dayosya Prabhavanti Nityam Dukkha Dayo Ye Manaso Vikaraha. Rajas has projecting power, Vikshepa Shakti, which initiates action and from which emerges the primal creative activity. It continually produces mental modifications such as attachment and grief. So it just begins with referring to one of the powers that Maya has. It is said that Maya has three powers. In Sanskrit, they are called Avarana Shakti, Vikshepa Shakti and Jnana Shakti. Avarana Shakti is the veiling power. Vikshepa Shakti is the projecting power. And Jnana Shakti is the illumining power. Now of these, the first two, they create bondage. That which covers and that which projects. And the last one, Jnana Shakti, that is the one that leads to liberation. How come, we might ask, Maya, which is ignorance under whom we all live all our lives, so even the struggle for liberation, struggle for moksha, occurs in Maya. And therefore Maya is sometimes said to be of not really two kinds, but the two ways the Maya can function in our lives. And Sri Ramakrishna gave those two ways very clear and names, something that we all can understand. He called them Vidya Maya and Avidya Maya. Can we use the power of ignorance to go beyond ignorance? It's almost like in some of the martial arts. I think probably judo, probably. I'm not an expert in martial arts. But in one of the martial arts, you use the power of the opponent to defeat the opponent. So you don't have to be stronger than the opponent, you just have to be more skillful. So that's essentially what is done here, that the Jnana Shakti is one of the ways Maya can exert its power. So we use that power of Maya to go beyond Maya. So in this verse, which begins by describing the role of Rajas, the first thing that we are told is that it has the projecting power. So the power to project comes through the Rajasic element in Maya. Look at the second line of that verse. Yatav pravrittihi prasrita purani. The students of Gita will at once recognize that this phrase comes exactly as it is, verbatim, in the Gita, in the 15th chapter, 4th verse. So what's this primal creative activity? What is meant here is that all creative energy comes from the divine. God is the creator. But in our own little ways, we are also creating things. And when we create, or even the idea that I have created this, is a way of appropriating what is really God's action and kind of appropriating it to myself. For instance, now, if you go and work in a garden and develop the garden and all these fruits and flowers, they come up, the person who has gone and worked in the garden feels, well, I worked hard. I did it. This is my creation. And what this primal creative activity, this verse on the Gita, which is quoted here, really means is that all creation, all creative activity really comes from God. But it's our ego that appropriates that power and says, I did it. That's why we might remember in many of Sri Ramakrishna's prayers, he would say, God, you are the operator. I'm a machine. I'm only an instrument. An instrument, when a writer writes books or novels or articles, where does the activity belong to? Because the days of people using pens and pencils have long gone, mostly. But imagine, or even just using a computer for that matter, the activity really occurs, the movement really occurs in the pen. But the pen doesn't think, well, if pen thinks that I have written it, then there's a big problem. But there is some conscious agent holding that pen or holding the keyboard of the computer who is really produced it. So similarly, we are just the pen or the computer in the hands of God. And everything that is created is done by God. I would like to say a little bit more about creation. Creation as it is understood across religious traditions can be seen as a movement from one to the many. Even if you think about a very theistic way of looking at creation, that God alone existed, and then God created this world. So from this one reality, this world has come. Or you could think in terms of one person who writes, say, 10 books. So there's one person, and from this one person, 10 created objects have emerged. Now, therefore, creation can be seen as manifesting in at least two different types or two different ways. One is the cosmic creation, which God created this universe, and individual creations. You and me creating things. One of the challenges spiritual seekers have, or one of the major causes of difficulty in focusing the mind in meditation, is this problem of creation, really. Because this creative force, this movement from the one to the many, is so strong that we just get carried into that flow. And in meditation, really, what we are trying to do is, suppose you're meditating in the evening, and most of the day we have spent dealing with multiplicity, people, objects, things, hundreds of entities around us. And then we expect, when we sit to meditate, just close your eyes and all those many will disappear and only the mind will come to the one, your Ishta, or whoever is the object of your meditation. Doesn't happen. Even if we close our eyes, the mind still goes after the many. It doesn't come back to the one. So sometimes it is said that the creative force within each one of us, which really has come from the divine, should be allowed to run its course for a while before we are able to kind of turn its direction. Sometimes when they want to build, they have a big hydroelectric project and want to build a dam on a river. And a river, if the river is flowing with full force, you just can't start creating a wall there, can't creating a barrier. The water, you just can't do any construction activity there. So sometimes what they do is either divert the flow of the river in a different channel so that they can build that barrier, and then once the barrier is built and it's strong, then it can hold the force of that river. So similarly, because this creative urge within us is so strong that our attempts at meditation may not succeed fully. And therefore we need to find a way to allow this creative energy to work its way out a little bit. We know that usually, and I suppose this probably is true for many rivers, I can at least give the example of what I saw in India, that rivers like the Ganges and many of the rivers which emerge in the Himalayas, if you go closer to the source, when they're really crashing down the mountain sides, it's unbelievable speed with which they cut through rocks. It's amazing to see with what great speed. In fact, there are places up in the Himalayas when you cannot even enter into the Ganges. It's too strong a force. You will just get carried away. But when you find then the river comes down into the plains, when it comes down to Haridwar and beyond, then it just calms down. And then it's much easier to enter into that water. So similarly, the creative energy, when it's too strong, we cannot change it. And therefore, for many devotees and spiritual seekers, it's helpful to have some outlets to express that creative urge in the heart. Now, this creative urge can manifest at all different kinds of levels. At the physical level, the creative urge expresses itself through sex. That's again, through that, from one to the many. the children, grandchildren, when you look at the family tree, it usually kind of goes this way. So again, even at the individual level, there is the movement from one to the many. But creativity functions not only at the physical plane, but at the level of the mind, at the emotional level, at the intellectual level. So a scholar or a scientist who is working on new inventions or any kind of an original creative work, even intellectual work, is still allowing that creative energy to be expressed through those channels. Artists, through music, through painting, through sculpture, there are any number of ways by which that creative urge in our heart can be expressed. And the more we allow that creativity to work its way out, it then becomes progressively easier to then, when that, as I said, that urge is allowed to run its course for a while, then kind of to make it turn and go back to that one. So that is what is meant here by saying, from which emerges the primal creative activity. It continually produces mental modifications such as attachment and grief. The mental modification, the word that is often used in text is vritti. Any kind of a knowledge, a feeling, any kind of a thought, any kind of a perception creates as if a wave in the mind. And that wave, a thought wave, if you like, is what is often gets translated as a mental modification. It's kind of a vikara, it's kind of a change that occurs there. And here they have only mentioned two, attachment and grief. But any kind of a vikara, any kind of a change in the mind created through thoughts, feelings, emotions, all of them will come as a mental modification. And again, all these waves that occur in the lake of the mind is often pictured as a lake. This also occurred due to the rajas that is present in it. So, two things that I mentioned here. That the rajas which is present, which is an attribute of Maya, it is one through which initiates action and which is the source or from which emerges the primal creative activity, and it produces these waves in the mind, the mental modifications. You will see next verse will give us in how many ways those waves can trouble us. Verse 112. Kama krodho lobha dambhabhya suya ahankara irsha matsaradhyastu ghoraha dharma ete rajasa pumpravrittihi yasmat esha tat rajo bandha hetuhu. These dreadful qualities of rajas, like lust, anger, greed, arrogance, jealousy, egoism, envy, and spite, prompt a person's outgoing tendencies. Therefore, rajas is a cause of bondage. Outgoing tendencies, pravritti. That's what creation does. Creation takes us from that one, go out into the many. There is a verse that is often cited from the Kathopanishad, which says that we are kind of doomed. That's actually the word that's the idea that's emphasized in that verse, in the sense that the senses that we have, they so naturally, so easily so effortlessly go out. There is no effort needed. All I need to do is just open my eyes, and they just, senses go out and capture all the beauty, all the color. My ears, they get all the sound. All of these sensory data that we get from the world, it just happens so effortlessly. There is no effort required. But to make these senses go inward, that needs a lot of effort. The mind goes out so effortlessly. Nobody has a problem saying, oh, there is so much concentration that I'm not able to think of the world. It's always the other way around. And so the outgoing tendencies are the major obstacle in any spiritual practice. And therefore, this verse says, therefore rajas is a cause of bondage, a bondage of remaining caught up in multiplicity. And because when we are caught up in this duality, this multiplicity, then it's very easy to forget the one reality, one being. Even those of us who see ourselves as believers, as those who have faith in God, we see ourselves as spiritual beings, it's sometimes humbling to ask oneself, before you go to bed tonight, ask yourself, from the moment you woke up in the morning until you went to sleep, how often or how much time did you spend thinking about God or thinking about your spiritual ideal? And whatever answer we might get hopefully will make us more humble. Because when it is difficult to keep our mind on God, even when we are praying, even when we are meditating, how much more difficult it is, virtually impossible to think of God when you are shopping or when you are doing other things in life. So we somehow need to find a way of it's a little bit like, I think musicians probably will appreciate this, that sometimes when you are sensitive to music and then you hear a certain tune or a certain, early in the morning, immediately after waking up, you hear some tune. And if you are sensitive to music, that rhythm, that note, that tune will somehow keep playing at the back of your mind. No matter, rest of the day you could be doing a bunch of different things, but that thing will keep on somehow at some level. This is just one example, but something like that should happen in our life. That it's not, it's good to have faith in God. It's good to have a spiritual ideal. It's good to have some spiritual practice. All of this is good. But sometimes we can just get stuck there. We can just feel, oh, I'm meditating in the morning, I'm meditating in the evening, I'm very satisfied, and all's well. Great, that's really well. But we can get even stuck in that feeling of wellness by thinking, I'm just doing what needs to be done. Because it's good to pause periodically and say, what is my daily practice of prayer and meditation? How much is it changing me? Do I feel like a different person? Do I feel I'm growing? Do I feel a greater depth in my life? And it's important to do this, just to make sure that we are on the right path. And one way of knowing whether our practice is getting deeper or not is to see that if we can, over a period of time, even if it's for a few months or a few years, say that maybe 5 years ago or 10 years ago, I wasn't being mindful, being alert about my spiritual ideal as often throughout the day as I'm perhaps able to do now. I'm able to think of the divine. Now, think of the divine, I'm not suggesting that you stop doing everything and just sit cross-legged and hold your rosary in hand. That's not the idea. The idea is, it doesn't take even a second, even no matter how busy a work you are engaged in, even if you just take a deep breath and just repeat your mantra once, or just think of the divine once, that's already very good. Nowadays, there are some of these apps, mindful, which kind of help people become mindful. And sometimes you have it on maybe a kind of an Apple Watch or something. They have this app which remind you to breathe mindfully. And that's good. I mean, it's good because if I can make an intelligent use of these kind of gadgets to deepen my spiritual life, that's fine. So we should find a way of find occasions throughout the day to be reminded of our spiritual ideal. Apparently, even through some mundane things. For instance, you could say, whenever you are driving, let's say, and you come to a red light and you stop. And then you can ask, well, as long as the light doesn't turn green, I'm just sitting there in the car doing nothing. What is my mind thinking then? Is it possible somehow that every time I see the red light, I can associate that red light with my mantra or with God? And mind is an amazing thing. Once you make that kind of a connection, then every time you stop at the red light, instead of getting irritated or saying, oh, I'm getting late and blah, 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 you can just say, oh, here is a red light. Let me just take a deep breath and think of God. Or every time you open your window and there is this sunlight coming, and you say, every time I see the sunlight falling on me or anywhere in my room, I'm going to think that God's grace entering into my room. Again, the more kind of a creative imagination we have, this is also kind of creativity of trying to associate apparently these material experiences that we have and connecting it with our spiritual ideal. These are the ways we can find to somehow think of the divine more often. And if we find a way of doing that throughout the day, you'll find that the quality of your evening meditation will improve. Because we are not like some kind of a switch. You're like, oh, I'm just now busy with my work, and then evening I come, I switch that off, now I switch on my spiritual self. It doesn't work that way. It's the same mind. If the mind that meditates is the same mind that is busy doing other activities. And so if I can find a way to think of the divine in some way throughout the day, whenever an opportunity comes, then I will be already kind of in that rhythm, and then it will be easy to meditate. So that's something that we can think about. So because these dreadful qualities of rajas, as they are mentioned here, they prevent me from thinking of that one, because it carries me towards all these lust, anger, greed, arrogance, jealousy, all of these things are associated with multiplicity. When you are in deep sleep, there is nothing of this. When you are not experiencing the many, None of these are present. And that's why Rajas is a cause of bondage. Verse 113. Esha vrittirnama tamo gunasya shaktir yaya vastva avabhasate nyatha saisha nidanam purushasya samsrutehe vikshepa shakte pravanasya hetuhu. So after dealing with the power of Rajas in the two verses, now we read about the Tamas. Tamas has veiling power, Avarana Shakti, which makes an object appear different from what it is. It is the cause of a person's transmigration and activates the projecting power. So this in some ways, although here it comes after the projecting power is described, but it's a precursor to that. First, there is a covering, and then there is a projection. And it is what makes object appear different from what they are. Brahman, the one infinite reality now, is appearing as a mortal human being with body and mind. And that is because this reality of Brahman is covered by this veiling power, and in its place, a mortal human being is projected. So a divine being is hidden by the veiling power, and in its place, a human being is projected. Just like a rope is hidden by the darkness, and in its place, a snake is projected. That the projection in Sanskrit, they call it Vikshepa. Now, one thing you have to keep in mind, although we say in darkness, it cannot be total darkness. It always has to be a partial darkness. Because the classic example is, of course, you enter into a room which is semi-darkness, and there is a coiled rope, and you mistake it for a snake. So this partial darkness is important, because if it was like total darkness, you wouldn't see the rope at all, so you wouldn't mistake it for a snake. So you need enough light to know that something is there, but not enough light to know what that something is. So that's a condition for superimposition. The Sanskrit word for superimposition is adhyasa. So if one thing has to be mistaken for another, there has to be this partial light. So now when Brahman is, or the divine being, is mistaken for a human being, the darkness here is, of course, insight, the darkness of ignorance. But it has to be a partial darkness. So going back to the rope and snake, what that darkness, this is important, listen to this, what that darkness hides is the identity of the rope. What the darkness does not hide is the existence of the rope. We know that there is some object lying on the ground. Its existence is not hidden, but its identity is hidden. So this darkness of ignorance, which is Maya really, Maya also is a semi-darkness. It doesn't hide the existence of Brahman. It hides the identity of Brahman. And because it doesn't hide the existence of Brahman, I know that I am. So my own existence, it's like this. None of us doubts our own existence. I mean, if we are in our sane mind, we would never say, I don't know whether I exist or not. That's a logical fallacy. You can never doubt your own existence. So what this darkness of Maya does not cover is this Sat. Often you might remember we think about Brahman in terms of Sat Chit Ananda. Sat means being, existence. So that existence is not hidden. So even when I say, I'm a human being, that first part of that sentence, I am, is real. That's true. It's like when you mistake a rope for a snake, and in fear you say, this is the snake. So the sentence, this is a snake, can be broken up into two sentences. You can say, this is something, and that something is a snake. So the first part, this is something, is an absolutely real statement. It's true. This is something. But the second part, this something is a snake, that's a misperception. So similarly, when I say I'm a human being, I am. That's true. That's the reality. So we are already kind of partially illumined already because I know I am. The problem is what I add after that am. I say I'm a human being, and that's like saying this is a snake. And that is why this verse points out, it makes an object appear different from what it is. It is the cause of a person's transmigration and activates the projecting power. So only when the object is hidden, the vikshepa, the projecting power, gets activated. Unless if the rope were not hidden, if it's in a bright light, you will never mistake it for anything. Why is it a cause of a person's transmigration? Because without the covering, without the hiding of the real nature, there wouldn't be any vikshepa. And there is no vikshepa, then there is no rebirth. In fact, there is no birth at all. Brahman is beyond birth and death. Sometimes people say, what is the proof of rebirth? How can you prove that there is rebirth? I think that's not a very good question, because when people question, sometimes when somebody asks me, what proof do you have that there is rebirth? I ask them, you are already assuming that this birth exists, this birth has occurred. The only thing you doubt is the rebirth. And what Vedanta begins by saying, it questions the assumption of this first birth itself. So rebirth becomes meaningful only if this birth is validated. And so because Brahman was never born, and therefore there is no rebirth in it. And so because we think we are born, these questions or doubts about rebirth can come to our mind. Verse 114. Prajnavanapi panditopi chaturopyatyanta sukshmarthadrik vyalidhastamasana veti bahudha sambodhitopi sphutam भ्रान्त्यारोपितमेव साधु कलयत्यालम्बते तद्गुणान् हन्तासौ प्रबला दुरन्ततमसः शक्तिर्महत्यावृतिः. Even a person who is wise, learned, clever, and endowed with subtle perception is covered by tamas and may not understand the Atman even when explained clearly. Such a person accepts as true whatever is superimposed through delusion and identifies with its qualities. Alas, how powerful is the great veiling power of the dreadful tamas. There is a very poetic passage in Shankaracharya's commentary on the Kathopanishad. Aho ati gambhira duravagahya chamaya idam. Those who follow Sanskrit, it's It's really enchanting. And what the Vedanta teachers point out, that how amazing is this power of Maya, that no one directly has told us, or is there any need to tell us that you are this body, you are this mind, you are a human being. Without anybody telling that to us, we are already fully convinced that that's who we are. On the other hand, through scriptures and through books and through conversations with these wise ones, we are told again and again and again, you are the Atman, you are not the body, you are not the mind, you are not the ego. In spite of being told that a gazillion times, it makes no impression. We still go about our day-to-day activities thinking, this is who we are. And he says, this is the power of Maya. That something which is not ever told to us has become our identity right now. And something, even when we are told again and again, just doesn't stick in the mind. And so this is something very worth reflecting on. That's why they say that if you look at a tree and you see a tree, you have seen nothing. But if you look at a tree and you see there a miracle of God, then you have seen the reality. Everything, this power of this veiling power of Maya covers everything and everyone. That's why our understanding and our judgment about other people, other objects, other places can be usually wrong. Because our judgments are based on what we see, but we never really see the person. We just see the outer layers. And then not even the layers the person is born with. Most of the layers are what kind of clothes the person is wearing. So the layers over layers, and we form our judgments. We go through our entire lives forming judgments and ideas about objects, places, things, looking at just these external layers, very rarely coming in touch with the core, the real stuff that is inside people, inside objects, inside things. And that's why we are almost like zombies. We are just like, we are not awake because we don't see. And what's even worse is not just that we don't see others as they are, we don't see ourselves as we are. And the two are connected. Because I don't see myself as I truly am, I'm not able to see other people as they truly are. How I see others is directly related to how I see myself. And we can see that obviously. We don't have any problem looking upon people and seeing, oh, these are all human beings. Why is it so easy for me to see everyone as a human being? Because it's easy for me to see myself as a human being. And yet, no matter how often we are told, God is the Father, God is the Mother, we are all God's children, and therefore we are all God's children. And look at people, and maybe the people you like, the people you love, it might be a little easier to see them as God's children. But there are a lot of people we just hate, we just don't like, we can't get along, we just can't stand some people. And so when you talk with them, it doesn't feel like I'm speaking with a child of God. You don't ever feel like that. So why is it difficult or why do we need to make so much extra effort to remember that these are all children of God? And that is because I don't see myself as a child of God. So if I'm able to see myself as a child of God, it'll become easier, more natural, more effortless for me to see others as children of God. So how I see others is directly related to how I see myself. You might remember there is this anecdotal story in the Mahabharata. Apparently, Krishna asked Yudhishthira, the eldest of the Pandavas, to go and find a very selfish, wicked person. Who is the most wicked person in the world? Go, look out and come and report to me. And then he said a similar thing to Duryodhana, the eldest of the Kauravas, and said, go and find a saint in the world and tell me whom you met. And the story goes on to say, after some time they both return, and Yudhishthira, who is such a good person, he said, I looked everywhere, couldn't find anyone who is bad. Everyone is so good, people are so nice. And Duryodhana comes with just the opposite, saying, all are rogues, all are... So, what we see outside is often a reflection of the things which may be in our own hearts. Maybe sometimes the things may be in a very seed form inside. In fact, there is a thought, the way of thinking which say that unless I had some seed of selfishness in my heart somewhere, I wouldn't be able to see selfishness in the world outside. Unless there was a little bit of a seed of violence in my heart, I wouldn't be able to see violence outside. So if we look at terrible things outside in the world, it's because there is some, maybe not in as gross a form as we see outside, but maybe in a very subtle form, those things are present in our own heart. Swami Vivekananda gives the example of a little baby playing in a room, and in that room there is this big bag of gold kept there. And he gives this example. He says, suppose a man suspiciously enters the room, looks here and there, grabs that gold bag and runs. If you and I were there, we would like, call 911 or go and make a shout, this is the thief who has come, and we would do everything that necessary that needs to be done. But if that little baby who is playing, who also sees the person come, takes the bag and go, and the baby doesn't react. Now, we might interpret this in a way like, well, baby doesn't know, doesn't understand, and so on. But psychologically, what they say is that there is no thief inside the baby's heart. Therefore, the baby doesn't see the thief outside. While the idea of cheating, of robbing is there in our heart. And so it's easier for us to interpret external activities that way. Now, this is not to be taken literally, of course. That baby is going to grow old in a few years, and then the thieves and smugglers, everything will be found inside that. But you get the idea. That's the way it's thing. So we will stop here today. If you have any thoughts, ideas, comments, questions, feel free to ask. Yeah. Go.
Pranam Swamiji. So my question is regarding the last topic that we discussed about whatever we have inside ourselves is what we project outside and see it in the outside world. But isn't some level of objectivity required to sort of stay true to ourselves? For example, going back to the instance where somebody is robbing something, and just because I don't know what robbing or the act means, can I just be oblivious to it?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, I'm not suggesting you allow people to steal and go away. What I'm saying is, the moment you identify a thief as a thief, you will want to take some action. You can't just sit there saying, "Oh, that's only Brahman coming there." I mean, you remember the story of Ramakrishna used to tell the story about a mad elephant, and how that elephant was crazy had gotten. And so the person sitting atop the elephant was telling the people, get out of the way, because this elephant could crush you. And people ran helter-skelter. But here was this one person who said, well, God is in everyone. So he just stood in the middle of the road and started singing hymns. Oh, there is God in this elephant. And of course the elephant came and he got very badly injured. And then when afterwards he was asked, why didn't you get out of the way? You saw that elephant coming. He said, well, it's the same, the divine in the elephant. And then, of course, as they said, but there was a divine in the person sitting up atop the elephant who was asking you to get out of the way. So the idea, I mean, think about it this way. In even order to see a thief, I'm actually denying the oneness of the divinity there. So first of all, it's my fault, my weakness, my misperception that instead of seeing Brahman, I'm seeing a human being and a human being who is a thief. So again, this is not to say you allow the person to do what they want. You do whatever needs to be done. But acknowledge in your heart that you are seeing this as a result of your own misperception. That's the idea. If you were in a samadhi sitting there, the thief would go, you wouldn't know anything. So, in some sense, what Vedanta does is it ultimately brings all the responsibility to oneself. Because in a very real way, the only person we really have any realistic control over in life is ourselves. And many of us are not able to even do that well. But our ability to, what most people try to do is control others, control external events. And they don't succeed. I mean, sometimes they can do a lot of damage, but there is going to be a limit to that. Ultimately, the real change that anyone can do is in their own heart. That's the idea. Any other ideas? Is it a follow-up or a different one?
A different one.
Let's see if someone else has a question first. Yes.
Swamiji, you mentioned in the beginning that do we take God's name all the time, like when we are doing shopping or we are doing some other work. So how we concentrate, do our work, and think about God? Do you mean that repeat the mantra, or just to think that whatever I'm doing, it's God's willing? That's what you meant, because I can't concentrate the work and think about the God at the same time.
Right. That's true. At any given moment, the mind can hold only one thought in it. So, one is clearly, as you said, we can try to consider or look upon the work itself is a form of some spiritual practice or connected with the divine in some way. But it's almost like sometimes in most computers now, when you are working on a certain document, usually you have many other apps open at the same time or many other windows open at the same time. But the one window or the app you are working on, that's above the others. And the others are in the background and maybe not as clear as the others are. So it's a little bit like that. So when you are engaged in your other activities, of course your mind has to be there. Most things that we do, we need to have a full concentration. But somewhere at the back, a not highlighted window could be the window of your spiritual practice. And that's why I said about the example of a tune a musician can hear. So a musician is not like singing throughout the day. They are busy doing other things. But somehow that tune can remain at the back of the mind. Or it's a little bit, think about a toothache or a headache. So when we have a headache, one, we still have to do other things in life. And so we do those things anyway, but we never forget that we have a headache, because headache will not let you forget that it is there. And so just as it is possible to do everything with the awareness of the headache, I think a God ache like, it should be possible. Yeah, that's what I think. Because, the human mind and the body is a very complex machine. There's so much power in it that I don't think we have tapped the full potential. I mean, it's very limited. It's not perfect in every way, but still, the mind has a tremendous amount of power, and we can use that potential to the best, as best we can. Yeah. Okay, just let's finish this first. Yeah. Go ahead. Come.
Swamiji,
Yeah.
Forgive me, I'm very young, so maybe I don't understand everything, but...
Oh, come on.
But yeah, I have a question about Sattvan, Rajas, and Tamas.
Yeah.
So before you use the analogy of if we're in the dark, but there is some light, we're able to see an example of a rope. And when we see this rope, we see the coil and we see that there's a snake, and that comes from the bondage that comes from Tamas and from Rajas. How do we see the rope for what it truly is? Because you said before that Sattvan is what brings illumination,
Right.
and Rajas and Tamas is what causes to have bondage. So how do we channel Sattvan, and how do we channel it, or what way do we use to see the rope for what
Right.
it truly
Yeah,
is?
good question. So in the rope snake analogy, clearly it's the light. You switch on the light, and then you know the rope to be a rope. And Sattva takes the role of this inner illumination, inner light. And so Sattva will come later on. So right now, we just begun with Tamas, Rajas, and Sattva will come. So how we need to cultivate that Sattva, which will help tame the power of Rajas and Tamas. So it'll come. Okay? Yeah, it's not yet covered now. It's a big subject, but it'll come. It'll be described later on. All right? Okay. Yeah.
Is it the nature of Brahman, and by quality, I mean the Atman as well? Is it the nature of Brahman basically beyond good and evil? So if you were to look at the story of the thief coming in and going out with the gold and everything, the child sees maybe the thief as Brahman itself.
The story of the?
The thief with the gold.
Right,
I mean, you're
okay.
talking about.
Yeah.
So the process of perception of Brahman, to perceive Brahman, it is important to let go of these definitions of good and evil, isn't it?
Yeah, theoretically, it's not easy to do it in practice. Yes, of course.
Right.
Yeah.
So when we have these conflicting things that, we find some people whom you've not forgiven, say, so I mean, like there is this equivalent Christian saying, forgive. I mean, hate the sin, but forgive the sinner. So how essential is it? I mean, to learn to perceive the one. I mean, beyond the good and evil.
Yeah, good. It's often said, hate the sin, not the sinner. It's easy to say it than do it. for people to separate out the quality from the person itself. I mean, it's a great noble aspiration, but a lot of times we just say, this is an evil person. So you just can't separate the evil from the person. And the reason we are not able to do that is because qualities and the object associated with that qualities cannot be easily separated. The human mind needs to be really super refined to be able to bring about that separation. And speaking about going beyond good and evil, again, it's easier to philosophize about it. But when you actually try to want to go beyond it, the way to do that is to try to remove as much of evil from our own heart as we can. So, evil is not to be transcended, evil is to be removed. Then when this goodness remains, that goodness needs to be transcended. Because otherwise people say, well, I can do all the evil I can and just transcend it and the problem is solved. It doesn't work that way. So the hard struggle in life is to hold on to the path of dharma, honesty, truthfulness. If I can hold on to that path of the right, the good, and try to eliminate the evil, then the question is, well, only the good remains. What do I do with this good? And if I just want to hold on to that good, I will go to heaven, I'll go to Brahmaloka, and then of course, because no matter how much good I do, that good will still be a very finite quantity. I will stay there for 1,000,000 years and then be reborn again. Or, if I have all this good now, and I can say, I don't want this good, I want to go beyond this good. And that's when you realize or become spiritually enlightened. So, although it is said you go beyond good and evil, in practice, what it means is eliminate the evil from your heart and then go beyond the good. We cannot go beyond evil by just holding that evil and say, okay, I'm going beyond it. In practice, that doesn't work. You can see the difference between good and evil in this way. If a person commits a crime, that person has to face the consequences. That person can't say, oh no, I've transcended that evil now, so don't punish me. It doesn't work. On the other hand, if I've done something good and I've been being rewarded, or be getting some big Nobel Prize or something, I can still say, I don't want it. They can't force me to accept it, but they'll force me to go to jail if I've done something wrong. So therefore, there is a difference between good and evil in that way. So good can be transcended, but evil has to be eliminated. That's the idea. Okay, so we will stop here today. And then when we meet next time, we will begin with verse number 115. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhur Muhuhu. So we'll continue with this study next Wednesday at 7:30. On Sunday for the satsang, our topic will be to labor is to pray. In many parts, although we have a Labor Day weekend in September here, in many parts of the world, the 1st of May is celebrated as the Labor Day. So a topic will be to labor is to pray. And on Saturday, we'll have our meditation as usual at 6 o'clock. We conclude with a prayer now. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.